He did not argue with the man. He let him finish, and he took the pamphlet, and he thanked him. And that pamphlet sat on the shelf over the wood box for 11 years and got used to start fires. Here is what stays with me about that morning. The government was not wrong. Contour plowing is the single best thing you can do for a hillside, and after the Dust Bowl, they built a whole federal agency around teaching it. They were just about 30 years late to our road, and they thought they had invented it. Number 2 on this list will tell you what is wrong with your soil in 10 seconds, for free, and there are laboratories that charge $40 to tell you the same thing. Number 1 is the one that man drove up our road to teach us, and my grandfather started doing it because a mule will not climb straight up a hill. He was not conserving anything. He was being kind to an animal, and he accidentally invented federal policy.
My name is Burl. 72 years in these mountains, and I have done every single thing on this list with my own 2 hands.
Some of it I would not do again if you paid me. I'm going to be honest about that part first, because a man who tells you everything the old way was better is selling you something. 9 of these I handed over to the machine and never looked back. Then it gets good, and the last 5 are the ones I would put up against anything a university has come up with since. Before we start, subscribe. This is not nostalgia, and it is not a survival fantasy. It is what my people actually did on 40 acres of hillside, what it cost them, and which parts of it a laboratory has since gone and improved. Let us count down. Number 25, threshing grain with a flail. A flail is 2 sticks joined by a leather hinge. You lay the wheat out on a barn floor and you beat it. That is the whole technology. You beat it until the grain comes loose from the head, and then you throw the whole mess in the air on a windy day and let the wind carry the chaff off. My grandfather threshed by hand into the 1930s. 2 men on a good floor could do maybe 6 bushels in a day, and by the end of it your shoulders were done and your hands were bleeding through the calluses.
A threshing machine did 6 bushels in about 4 minutes. There is nothing romantic about it, and I want to say that plainly.
The flail was not a better way. It was the only way, and the second something better showed up, every man in this county walked away from it and never went back. I have one hanging in the barn, and it is a decoration. Number 24, wash day at the kettle. Monday was wash day, and it was a full day. You built a fire in the yard under a cast iron kettle. You hauled the water. You boiled the whites. You worked everything over a corrugated board by hand. You wrung it out. You hung it. And you did it again. My mother's hands were cracked from November to March every year of her life. The lye and the soap did that. She wrapped them in lard and rags at night, and by Wednesday they would close again. The washing machine is one of the great inventions in the history of the world, and I will not hear otherwise. It gave every woman in this country back a full day of her week, and nobody who ever watched a woman do it the old way would argue. Number 23, cutting hay with a scythe. Here I will split the difference, because this one is not all the way dead. A scythe cuts a swath about 6 feet wide with each stroke, and a good man in good grass can lay down an acre in a long day. A sickle bar mower behind a tractor does that acre in 20 minutes.
So for hay, the machine won completely. But I still keep a scythe with a sharp edge on it, and I will tell you exactly why.
There is a bank behind my spring house that runs steeper than any wheel will hold. Every summer that bank grows up in briars, and every summer I take the scythe to it, and it takes me 40 minutes and no gasoline, and it does not roll over on top of me. A tool being obsolete for the big job does not make it obsolete for the small one. Remember that, because it comes back around at number 13. Number 22, pulling stumps with a mule and a chain. You dig around the stump. You cut what roots you can reach with an axe. You wrap a chain, you hitch the mule, and you pull, and mostly nothing happens. Then you dig some more and cut some more and pull again, and a day later you have 1 stump out of the ground. A man with the machine does 30 in that same day, and he does it sitting down. I cleared 4 acres of new ground that way in 1968 with my father and a mule named Kate, and it took us from March to July. I am not going to pretend that was good.
It was the worst work I have ever done, and every one of those stumps is still in the fence row where we rolled it.
Number 21, milking by hand, twice a day, every day. 12 cows, 5 in the morning and 5 in the evening, 365 days a year, Christmas morning. the day my grandmother was buried. The morning after the flood took the lower bridge. A cow does not know what day it is, and a cow that is not milked gets sick. The machine won this one too, and I am glad of it. But I am going to give you the part of it that did not deserve to die, because there is one. When you milk by hand, your hands are on that udder for 8 minutes twice a day, and you feel everything. You feel a hot quarter 3 days before it turns into mastitis. You feel the swelling before there is anything to see. The dairymen I know now walk the line with a flashlight looking for what my hands used to find in the dark. The machine is faster and the machine does not feel. Number 20, carrying the water. 2 buckets on the yoke from the spring to the house, 8 or 10 trips a day.
A gallon of water weighs a little over 8 pounds, and a full bucket is about 40. Do that math across a childhood.
Every woman I knew growing up had one shoulder lower than the other, and I did not understand why until I was 40 years old. Indoor plumbing beat this so badly that there is not even a conversation to have. I said the same thing about the outhouse in my last video, and I will say it again here. Number 19, the 2-man crosscut saw. 2 men, 1 on each end, and a rhythm. You do not push a crosscut saw, you only pull, and if the man on the other end pushes, he will buckle the blade and you will both stop and look at each other. Learning that rhythm with your father is one of the memories I keep. We dropped a white oak 4 feet through the butt in 1961. It took most of a morning. A man with a chainsaw does that in 90 seconds. The rhythm was worth having, and the saw was not. I will keep the memory and I will keep the chainsaw. Number 18, hoeing corn. Not a garden row.
11 acres of corn hoed by hand 3 times a season, because the weeds will take a crop faster than any drought will.
My brother and I went down those rows every June of our lives with the sun on the back of our necks and our shirts stuck to us. 11 acres 3 times with a hoe. A cultivator pulled through those same rows, does it in an afternoon and does it better because it breaks the crust and lets the rain in while it kills the weed. The hoe only kills the weed. Number 17, the dash churn. A crock and a wooden plunger and 40 minutes of up and down until the butter breaks. That was a child's job because it did not take strength, only time, and a child is the only person on a farm with time. I have churned probably 200 pounds of butter in my life, and I cannot tell you one thing about it that a machine does worse. Number 16, hauling manure by the cartload. A barn cleaned by hand with a fork, into a cart, out to the field, and spread by hand with the same fork. 80 loads to cover a field, and the smell in your clothes for a week. The manure spreader was invented in the 1870s, and it took another 60 years to reach some of these hollows. When it got here, nobody mourned. Number 15, shucking corn with a husking peg. A husking peg is a hooked piece of iron strapped to your palm. You hook the shuck, you rip it down, you snap the ear off, you throw it in the wagon and your hand is already reaching for the next one. A fast man did 100 bushels in a day, and there were contests. My Uncle Dewey could do 130 and he was proud of it his whole life. A combine does that field in an hour, and it shells the corn at the same time, and my Uncle Dewey's record is a story I'm telling to a camera in 2026 because there is nobody left who cares. That is 9 of them, and that is my honest accounting.
The machine won those, and the men who tell you otherwise never had to do them for a living. Yeah. Now it turns.
Everything from here down is something I still do, and the last 5 are the ones I would defend against anybody. Number 14, reading a hoof. An animal tells you it is hurt about 2 weeks before it limps. You do not see it, you feel it. You pick up the foot and you feel for heat, and heat in 1/4 of the hoof and not the others means an abscess is forming in there. 2 weeks of warning is the difference between a farrier trimming out a soft spot and a lame animal you cannot work in the middle of hay season. The man who shot horses for a living could tell you where the abscess was by the temperature of the hoof wall with the back of one hand. That is not folklore. Inflammation makes heat, and heat travels, and your hand is a perfectly good thermometer if you have calibrated it on 10,000 feet. Number 13, sharpening on a stone at the right angle. Here is the thing nobody teaches anymore. It is not about how sharp you get it. It is about the angle you hold, and holding the same angle every single stroke. An axe wants about 30 degrees. A scythe wants closer to 20. A knife for skinning wants 15, and a knife for the kitchen wants a little more. If you change the angle halfway through, you're just rounding the edge over, and you will never understand why it will not cut. My grandfather taught me to lay the blade flat on the stone and then lift the spine the width of 2 pennies. That is about 15 degrees, and I have never needed a better instrument than that. The reason this one matters is the reason I told you at number 23.
Most of the tools people say are worn out are not worn out. They are dull, and dull and worn out are not the same word.
Number 12, the trucker's hitch. A knot that gives you a 3-to-1 mechanical advantage with nothing but rope. You throw a loop in the standing part, you pass the working end through it, and you pull. What you have made is a pulley out of a piece of rope, and it will pull a load down tighter than your arms alone ever could. Every load of hay, every load of lumber, every trip to the sale barn. You can buy a ratchet strap for $9, and I own several. But a ratchet strap is one length and a rope is any length, and a ratchet strap fails all at once with no warning while a rope tells you it is going. Number 11.
Splicing barbed wire without a stretcher. A wire breaks. You are half a mile from the barn and the cattle are already looking at the gap.
You take the 2 ends and you wrap each one back on itself, leaving loops. You put a stick through both loops. You turn the stick and every turn shortens the wire and takes up slack, and you keep turning until the fence sings when you thump it. Then you tie the stick off. That is a Spanish windlass, and it will hold as long as the fence does. Free in about 4 minutes with a stick you found on the ground. Number 10, reading weather off the animals and the smoke. Cattle lie down before a hard rain.
They do it reliably enough that you can plan a morning around it. Smoke from the chimney tells you the same thing from the other direction.
When the pressure is high, the smoke goes straight up and the weather holds. When the pressure drops, the smoke will not rise. It rolls down the roof and lies in the yard, and you have about 8 hours. I am not going to tell you this beats the radar on a telephone, because it does not. What it does is work when the power is out and the tower is down, and it costs nothing to know. Number 9, cutting and castrating in cold weather. You do this work in late fall or in the very early spring and never in July. The reason is flies. A fly finds an open wound within minutes in warm weather and lays eggs in it, and what happens after that will make a grown man sick. In cold weather, there are no flies, and the wound closes clean. Every veterinarian in this country will tell you the same thing today, in the same words, for the same reason. That one did not need updating. Number 8, choosing the mother, not the size.
Everybody who does not know cattle picks the biggest animal in the lot. Every man who has fed cattle through a winter picks differently.
You look at the udder first, and you want it high and tight and level, because a cow with a heavy hanging bag will step on a teat by her 4th calf and be done. You look at the feet, because a cow walks to her feet her whole life. You look at how the mother of that animal did, if you can find out. Size is the last thing on the list, and it is the first thing a beginner looks at. Number 7, building a haystack that sheds its own water. Before balers, hay went in a stack around a center pole, and a stack built wrong is ruined hay by January. You build the outside layer with the butt ends of the hay pointing out and slightly down, all the way around, and you keep the middle of the stack higher than the edges as you go. Every stem on the outside becomes a little roof shingle, and the water runs off the outside of the stack instead of into it. A well-built stack will keep hay for 2 years with nothing over it. I have opened a stack in the 2nd February and had it come out green in the middle and smelling like June. Number 6, planting by soil temperature, not by the calendar. The calendar says the 15th of May. The calendar is a piece of paper and it does not know what April did. My grandfather planted corn when he could sit bare on the ground for a full minute without wanting to get up. That is about 55 degrees. And 55 degrees is the number in every planting guide printed today, because below that corn seed sits in cold, wet dirt and rots instead of sprouting. He never owned a thermometer.
He had a way of asking the ground the same question the thermometer asks and getting the same answer. Now we come to the last 5.
These are not chores. These are the ones where I look back and understand that the people who taught me were doing something a great deal smarter than they ever said out loud. And in every one of these cases, a university figured out the same thing later and gave it a name and published it. Number 5, reading the weeds to read the soil. A field tells you what is wrong with it in plain language, and the language is which weeds volunteer in it. Sheep sorrel and plantain coming in thick means your ground has gone acid and wants lime. Dandelion and chicory, with those long taproots, mean the soil is compacted and hard, and those plants are literally drilling it for you. Nettles and lamb's quarters mean the nitrogen is high, which usually means something died there or the manure went on heavy. Sedge and rushes mean the water is not leaving. My grandfather walked a field he was thinking about renting, and he did not take a soil sample because there was nowhere to send one. He looked at what was already growing there, and he knew within about 10 minutes whether the ground was sour, tight, wet, or rich. That is called indicator species now.
There are textbooks on it. There are extension bulletins with the same 4 plants I just named and the same 4 conclusions.
A soil laboratory will charge you $35 and take 2 weeks, and for the 4 questions that actually change what you plant, the weeds will tell you for free while you are standing there. And there is a thing about it that I did not appreciate until I was old. A soil test gives you 1 number from 1 cup of dirt out of 1 hole. The weeds are reading the whole field, all season, at every depth their roots go down to, and they are averaging it for you. Where the sedge stops and the sorrel starts, that line on the ground is telling you the water table changes right there. I bought this place in 1979, and the man selling it told me the bottom field was the good one. The bottom field was solid sedge and buttercup. I bought it anyway because I wanted the house, and I have spent 47 years putting tile in that field, and I still cannot count on it in a wet spring. The weeds told me before I signed. I just did not listen to my own grandfather that day. Number 4, corn and beans and squash in the same hill. You plant the corn first.
When it is a hand high, you plant pole beans at the base of it, and between the hills you plant squash.
3 crops in the ground 1 crop would normally take. Here is what is happening, and none of the men who taught me could have explained it in these words. The beans are legumes, and legumes fix nitrogen out of the air into the soil through the bacteria on their roots, and corn is the hungriest thing there is for nitrogen. So the beans are feeding the corn. The corn is a living trellis, so the beans need no stakes. And the squash runs flat across the whole thing with those big rough leaves, shading the ground so the weeds cannot start and the water cannot evaporate, and the prickly vines keep some of the animals out. Every one of those 3 plants is doing a job for the other 2. Agronomy calls this intercropping, and it has been studied to death, and the finding is consistent. Those 3 together on 1 acre out produce the same 3 grown separately on 1 acre, and they do it using less nitrogen from a bag. The Cherokee were doing this here before any of my people arrived, and my family learned it from them and did it for 150 years without once using the word nitrogen. There's one more piece to it that took me a long time to see. The 3 of them come off at different times. You pick beans through August while the corn is still filling. The corn comes in September. The squash sits in the field until frost and then keeps in the cellar until March. 1 planting, 1 piece of ground, 1 weeding, and food coming out of it from midsummer until the following spring. A field of corn by itself gives you 2 weeks of work and then 1 wagon load and then nothing. That is a fine way to farm if you have a grain elevator to sell to. It is a terrible way to farm, yet the point is that 9 people eat all winter. Number 3, moving the cattle before the grass is gone. A man who does not know grass turns his cattle into a field in April and takes them out in September, and by July that field is dirt and weeds.
My grandfather split his pasture with a hot wire and a few locust posts, and he moved the cattle every 4 or 5 days.
They ate the top third of the grass, and then they went to the next piece, and the piece they left had 5 weeks to come back before they saw it again. He would have told you he did it because the grass lasted longer. That is true, and that is not the half of it. A grass plant grows its root as deep as it can afford to. Graze it lightly and let it rest, and it keeps a deep root and it keeps growing. Graze it to the ground and keep the animal standing on it, and the plant kills off its own root to survive. And after that, it cannot reach water in August, and it dies, and something worse takes its place. That is why the overgrazed field goes to weeds, not because the cattle ate the grass, because the grass let go of its roots. This is the entire foundation of what they now call rotational grazing or management-intensive grazing, and there are men making a very good living teaching it in seminars. My grandfather did it with a spool of wire and a pocket watch. I will give you the number that made me believe it, because I did not believe it at first either. When I came back to this place in the 70s, I ran cattle the lazy way, one big field all summer, the way everybody around here started doing it. I carried 19 head on that ground, and I fed hay from the end of September. I put the wire back up in 1994 because my father told me to, and I was tired of hearing it.
I carry 31 head on that same ground now, and I do not start feeding hay until past Thanksgiving. Same acres.
Same rain. Same grass seed, never reseeded it once. The only thing that changed is that the cattle leave before the plant is eaten down, and the plant gets to keep its root. Number 2, running the chickens in behind the cattle. This is the one I want you to hear, even if you never own an animal in your life, because of how completely it explains those people. The cattle come off a piece of pasture. 3 or 4 days later, not the same day, you turn the chickens onto that same piece and let them work it for 2 days before you move them on. Ask a man in 1930 why, and he will tell you the chickens get fat for free. Here is what is actually happening in that field. The parasites that live on cattle lay their eggs in cattle manure. Those eggs need a few days to develop into larvae. If you turn the chickens in on the first day, there is nothing there yet. If you wait too long, the larvae have already migrated out onto the grass where the next cow will eat them. Let it 3 or 4 days, the larvae are still in the pat, developed and sitting.
A chicken scratching a manure pat apart is eating those larvae. Every one she eats is one that never gets into the next animal.
And while she is doing it, she is spreading that pat out flat across the grass, so it fertilizes instead of killing a dinner plate-sized spot under itself, and she is adding her own manure on top. Parasite control, fertilizer spreading, and free eggs out of one habit that nobody wrote down. That is the center of what the pasture people are doing now with what they call multi-species rotation, and it is in the research, and it works. And it works for exactly the reason my grandfather could not have told you. He just knew the chickens ought to follow the cows, and that his cattle wormed easier than his neighbors. And notice the timing, because the timing of the whole thing and the timing is what got lost. Everybody who keeps a few chickens today lets them run in the pasture with the cattle all the time, all together. That does almost nothing. The burr has to come in behind the animal on a delay, on ground the herd has already left. 3 days is too early on a cold week, and 4 days is too late in August, and the way you know is you kick a pat apart and look. My grandfather kicked pats apart with the toe of his boot his entire life, and I thought it was a nervous habit. He was reading a clock that nobody told him he was reading. Number 1, plowing across the hill instead of up it. I told you at the start about the man from the extension office. Straight up and down a slope. Every furrow you cut is a channel, and the first hard rain runs down those channels and takes the topsoil with it to the creek. Across the slope on the contour, every furrow is a little dam. The rain hits it and stops and stands and soaks in. That is the difference between a hillside that farms for 200 years and one that is bare rock in 40. Now, the honest part, because I promise you honesty. My grandfather did not do it to save the soil. He did it because a loaded mule will not pull straight up a grade like ours, and it will hurt itself trying. He was working with the animal, and the animal could only go across. The Dust Bowl came in the 1930s. Millions of acres of plowed ground got up and blew away, and the federal government built the Soil Conservation Service in 1935 and sent men out with pamphlets to teach American farmers to plow on the contour. 2 men in this hollow had been doing it since before the First World War, not because they were wise.
Because the mule could not do it the other way, and they listened to the mule. And here is the part that ought to bother somebody.
The country that had to be taught this in 1935 had been plowing straight up and down for 100 years, on flat ground, behind a tractor that did not care about the grade. The tractor made it possible to farm stupid. The mule never did. Every one of those Great Plains farms that blew away had a machine strong enough to ignore the land. You can walk the upper field here and find the same furrow lines my great-grandfather laid in because the ground never left. 40 acres of hillside in a place that gets 50 inches of rain a year, farmed for 115 years, and the topsoil is still on it. That is what number one bought us, and nobody in my family ever knew they had bought it. That is the thing I most want to leave you with tonight. Almost none of these people were geniuses, and almost none of them knew why any of it worked. They knew what happened when they did it, and what happened when they did not, and they kept the one and dropped the other for about 400 years, and they passed it down. Nobody ran a trial. Nobody published anything.
It was just 4 centuries of paying attention, and it produced answers that hold up against the laboratory more often than it has any business doing.
They also did 9 things that were pure misery, and I told you about those first, because a man who tells you they were right about everything is trying to sell you a book. Go look at whatever piece of ground you have got. Look at what is growing in it that you did not plant, and go read what those weeds mean, and then go look at whether your water runs off it or into it. That is 2 of the 25, and it costs you an afternoon. My grandfather's in the ground about 400 yards from where I'm sitting. He could not have told you what nitrogen was. He fed 9 people off 40 acres of hillside for 50 years and never bought a bag of anything.